So today I have a guest that I've known for several years. She is a non-duality speaker, teacher. She does about a weekly live that's free for anyone to join on, I think, her YouTube channel. She has a YouTube channel with many videos going back like 10 years. She's a friend of mine. We interact, relatively infrequently, but I would actually consider her a teacher to me in some ways, for sure. And she's also an author and actually educated as a playwright. And so this is her, and this is Lisa Cairns.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to the channel.
Thank you.
Yeah. Did I say your last name correctly?
Well, in England, we would say Cairns, but I think in different countries with different accents, they say it differently.
Oh, okay. Oh, and I also would like to introduce Khaleesi.
Yeah, Khaleesi.
Okay, so Khaleesi.
She's just telling off the neighbor.
Yeah, and she's going to be part of the story you tell today, probably, I think, because she kind of came at an important time in your life.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, so let's just start with, just give us a little background on yourself, like, where are you from? Where did you grow up? And I'm actually curious about what were you like as a kid? What were you like as a little girl? What were you interested in? What was the world like for you?
Yeah. So I grew up in England, mother English, father Scottish. And what was I like as a kid? I think I was like super imaginative. I was thinking about this the other day. I remember I always used to go to school with my imaginary animals, and my mom had to open the boots, and my imaginary horse would get out, and my imaginary dog would get out, and my imaginary fairy would get out.
Oh my gosh.
I remember my dad, he said also that he had an imaginary friend till he was quite late in life. So I think I was really creative. I really loved playing and making up games and stories and animals.
Mm-hmm. You had a love for animals, is that right? Like from a very young age?
Yeah, from a very young age. I became a vegetarian at 8, but I didn't know back then, that was in the 80s, what vegetarianism was. So it wasn't like I was like, Mom, Dad, I want to be a vegetarian. I was just I got fish. My mom bought me a fish, and I was sitting, eating fish fingers, looking at the fish. And then I was like, hang on, there is a problem here. There's conflicts in the brain. I am eating a fish. And I think I was reading my a story to my fish while eating fish fingers. And so it slowly became any animal I couldn't eat. And then my mom employed a vegan cleaner, which I'm sure she regretted. So then I used to follow this cleaner around and ask her lots of questions about veganism. So I think by the age of 10 or 11, I was beginning on the track of veganism, which I kind of go in and out of. I've always been a vegetarian, but I go in and out of veganism. I sometimes follow it and sometimes less so.
Yeah.
And I remember also being really, really happy as a child. Just feeling really lucky and really blessed, and I really I had a fantastic life. I can look back now and I can see there were issues building, but my experience prior to puberty was I felt really lucky. I did have problems, but I just had this sense of happiness, or this glow. Maybe a lot of children have that. Just an immediacy.
I think it's pretty natural for children, especially if they're in a safe, emotionally connected, loving environment. It's just natural for them to enjoy life. They're so simple and innocent, know?
Yeah. I remember playing a lot, not doing schoolwork and playing a lot outside and with my toys. I had lots of toys and I used to really love that. Yeah. Till about 11. And then I think as I got to maybe 10, 11, things began to get more challenging for me. And I would say that I began to suffer. I suspect I suffered before that, but it's when I really began to realize that I was suffering or feeling suffering or beginning to I wasn't depressive, but just wasn't contented, wasn't happy. Yeah.
I can completely relate to that. I think I've thought back on this, and while, when I was a child, like I was so empathic and I grew up in an environment that was not emotionally connected and so forth. So I definitely felt the pain of like my parents and people around me. I felt a lot of people's pain, but I think I was still so porous and open that it didn't turn into like a personal experience of suffering, but I was definitely picking it up. But it is interesting when we become, I think it's social awareness, when we become socially aware.
Yeah.
Like I saw when I was raising kids, like I saw them go through this when they turned from being completely oriented to the family and what they're interested in, to all of a sudden they were hyper acutely aware of what all their peers thought of them and what they were doing and so forth. It really does. It's just like the self consciousness ramps in a big way. And now you're trying to maintain this external identity, right? And anyway, I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, but I remember that few year period of it just being really rough to go through that.
Yeah. So that I experienced that myself, and I seem to recognize that in children as well. I don't have my own, but when I watch children, that they go through this period where they really change. I also, what coincided though, when puberty came, was I went through a lot of trauma, and so that like also affected things. But I think there would have been like a movement into suffering without the trauma, but the trauma kind of like exacerbated things. And
yeah, man, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that as well.
Yeah.
And I know at some point you became more than just vegan. You were like, what is the term for it? You became like an activist, essentially. Yeah.
Have I told you that before? Yeah, I did actually. I don't know if I talk about that often. Yeah, and I did some really crazy things, like, yeah.
I think you told me you laid down in front of a bulldozer.
I did, yeah. Well, not quite in front of a bulldozer, but sort of, and like got held up at gunpoint in the West Bank. Yeah, like.
Oh yes.
So, I have a really bad memory, so I can't really remember a lot of the things I did. But I would certainly remember being held up at gunpoint a couple of times, and like being a blockage, so that the Israeli army couldn't come towards Palestinian children. Yeah, that was just so intense. So I did that, and I also did like animal protests and particularly animal stuff. But I did other protests, but animal stuff that were quite aggressive and
yeah. I remember you saying something to me almost verbatim probably, but I'll tell you what, it was a very short exchange, but I remember you saying when you were talking about going to the West Bank and you were talking about going, and I remember you saying, I went there, and the more I was there, the more I realized like both sides had this sort of like the anger and the inability to see the other side. And I remember you saying, I felt so hopeless. Lisa wanted to save the world, but she couldn't do it.
Yeah. It was such a good lesson, but it was, like I remember one experience, which I might get this wrong because of my memory, but it was something along the lines of this, was that there was a young girl killed, like, I don't think on purpose, like a stray bullet went through her throat and killed her in the West Bank in a refugee camp. And it was like reported really weirdly, like as if it was almost like the Palestinian people's fault. And then a few days later, her cousin blew himself up in front of Israeli soldiers and killed like a couple of Israeli soldiers. And I remember like just realizing like how hopeless it was, like that you can't find peace in the flow. You have to find it internally, because it just goes on, because then all the Israeli families will be traumatized, and so they will be wanting revenge, because unless you've got self-awareness, it's a natural place for trauma to go. Like, I have to find something to blame for this. It can't be without blame. Yeah, it's just, and then the way it was reported, like the different stories that you'd hear about it, the narrations, and like even now when you listen to people's arguments, like if two people fall out, like narration is such a weird thing, the way that we look at stories, the way we tell our stories, like how they change with emotions. But I just kind of realized that after this experience, I was there for a month, and I kind of realized that I couldn't find peace in the flow. Like, there was no way that any of these protests were ever going to become peaceful, because it was just creating more and more hate in a way. Not saying that it shouldn't be done, because what do you do in that situation when people are treating each other in such an awful way and have so much hate? But you can't force peace. It's a very difficult situation. And just realize my naivety as well. You know, you're sort of like 22 and you think like, yeah, we could protest or we can find peace out there. And it's such a complex thing. It's really about going inside and finding peace in yourself first. You really have to do that. You can't force peace outside. That's just war.
I'm with you. You know, I never got involved in like political things or protest type things, but when my suffering became so exquisite, like beyond, it just was so bad. And I could feel, and I could even feel it energetically. I could see it in the way people move and think and process reality and try to make themselves feel better. Yeah. I felt absolute hopelessness in it. And I knew it. Yeah. I knew that's not the way. That made me feel, in a sense, that made me feel worse because I'd never seen a way. No one ever showed me a possibility or anything like that. So it was like hopelessness squared kind of thing. And I walked around in that for a handful of years. But man, I'll tell you, in retrospect, that's fucking grace. The fact that happened to me, the fact that I felt that kind of suffering, that kind of depth of suffering, other people suffering, my own, like that, seeing that the human condition is not going to get me out of it or get us out of this, not in a real way. There are exceptions. I mean, there are incredibly compassionate people out there that can make amazing change, even in violent situations, Thich Nhat Hanh and these things, but these are rare exceptions. But the individual or the seeming individual has an opportunity to really look inside, like you're talking about. Now, I'm curious, when did you become like overtly interested in spirituality or Buddhism, or how did that come about for you, if you can remember it?
Well, actually, it was before I went to the West Bank. So I went to the West Bank with a Buddhist group. So I was just beginning to get into spirituality then. So I kind of had spiritual experiences when I was a teenager through theatre. And that's, I think, why I fell in love with theatre and storytelling. My mum used to take me to these musicals. Like, have you ever seen Jesus Christ Superstar and Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat? We used to go and see all these things in London. We lived near London. And you know, when the music's playing and when the whole audience are like listening intently, and then you have like this focus or this energy or this excitement. I think I used to have these waking up experiences in that. Like, it just was so electrifying. And I used to find that one of the most special moments in the plays was the silence between each scene. You know, suddenly the music would drop and then there'd just be dead silence in the whole auditorium. And then, you know, the next thing would come in. I just think I had these like awakening experiences with my mom. And my mom was really into music. So I used to go to a lot of concerts and just really loved that. And then also by myself, I used to have spiritual experiences. I didn't know I was meditating, but I used to listen to music really loudly in the lounge with these headphones on by myself. And I used to lay there, and this is a little embarrassing to admit, but I was doing Tantra. I didn't know that. And I'd imagine having the most perfect boyfriend or perfect partner. And as I imagined it, like, I'd feel more and more loved. And then eventually I would realize, or something would happen where I'd realize that I'm feeling this love without having a partner. And so then the partner would begin to disappear. And I'd just be like this immense love. And I wasn't purposely meditating. It just kind of happened that way.
That was so beautiful.
Yeah.
Meta meditation. Yeah.
Yeah. So these sorts of things is what got me into theatre and writing. And it also got me into Buddhism, because when I first got introduced to it, I could hear that silence that they were talking about. Like, I'd experienced it many times in these spiritual experiences that I'd had, but I couldn't name it. I wasn't able to say what it was. So when they talked about being in the present moment, like my heart would begin to tingle, and I knew there was some truth in that. And the way that I got into it was a friend that I met at university. She went to the Buddhist center when she was like 15 with a friend. And so when I went to university, she was in the same dormitory as me, and we just started talking, and she'd tell me about it. And So she took me there, and then she took me to, do you know a teacher called John de Ruyter from Canada? De Ruyter?
I'm not sure if I'm familiar.
I forget his last name. And she took me to like a satsang of his, and it was just like in silence. And this is right in the beginning. He would just sit there and like give people darshan, I think it's called, when you stare in people's eyes, and I'd be like, what is this? And this guy kind of like enjoyment of fantasy. I think I quite liked the idea of, this kind of spiritual event. So that was my beginning.
So two things came to me as you were talking about the theater experiences and the mystical experiences and so forth. One is obviously you have a wonderful mother. That's really, really cool. That she took you to that and enjoyed that with you. The other thing is, I'm telling you, various forms of art are so good at opening a lens. It's not necessarily an awakening in and of itself, but opening a lens for people. And I often encourage people to just feel into their life. Like, where in your life have you felt this? Because you have. I know you have, right?
Yeah.
Was it when you're listening to music? Maybe you're looking at a visual art. Maybe, and these ways of these like conduits to let's say the beyond or whatever in the form of art. I mean, they're so powerful to kind of give us breadcrumbs maybe to start looking inward,
Yeah.
So cool. And so did you start practicing Buddhism at that time or any specific?
I've got a bit of an obsessive personality, even though I've never named it as that. But I realize now that I get fixated on things. So I was fixated on theater and writing, and still am. I love that. But I got fixated on Buddhism and like started obsessively practicing, and I became like a friend of the Buddhist order that I was in, where I had like these study classes once a week, and then I went to extra classes at the weekend. And then instantly I adopted like an hour minimum meditation a day. I had very good discipline. And started going on all these retreats, like, just really diving into it. I think I volunteered there as well. Yeah. So
how did you take to like the meditation, the prolonged meditation retreat settings? Did it feel really resonant with you, or was it challenging to go to sit and?
I think it was very painful at the beginning part. I remember the first time, or one of the first times, like it felt like my mind was like bouncing, like it was like like ping pong balls, and just like sitting there for 15 minutes. I was like, and this is before like we had handies and stuff, or mobiles, you call them, cell phones. And then it got easier and easier, but I mean like immense pain I went through. Like when I did the 10-day ones, the Vipassana 10 days one, it'd be like, you'd get to day 6 and day 7. It'd normally be like 7 days of agony. Like, so you did 10 hours meditation a day, and then suddenly there would just be a boom and you would have an opening. But like I remember sitting there one time having an experience, like I thought my legs were breaking because you weren't allowed to move. You had to sit in the meditation posture. And I was like, I can't do this. I felt like I was sweating. I felt my legs were breaking. And then the bell went and I moved my legs and I was like, oh, they don't hurt at all. That was all in my mind.
I can totally relate to this. So I did some Zen sesshin.
I remember you saying, yeah.
Yeah, and sesshin is 7 days. It's very traditionally structured. It's Japanese Zen, and it is rigid. It's just like that. It's very rigid. You can't move during the round. So the pain in your legs gets exquisitely. It's pretty impressive, like how much that starts to hurt after a while. But I do remember exactly those experiences where my mind would just be. I remember like a thought would just be like, stand up and walk out, go, leave, go to your car, go. You can just leave right now. It's so easy. Just go, just leave. Like, this is horrible. I can't stand it. When's the bell gonna ring? And you're like 3 minutes into a round, right? And it's just torture in the mind. And then, but you do that for a while, and then like it would exhaust itself, and all of a sudden it was just dead quiet and like no pain. Like, where did it go though? Yeah. Was it here? Who's pain? What the fuck is going on? Right? It's so wild to just be in that sustained meditation environment. Yeah. Yeah. So, and then at some point you became interested in, well, I know you went to India and sat and listened to Ramesh Balsekar.
Yeah.
And how was that? Is that in this time frame, or is that later on?
Yeah. So when I first started the Buddhist group, quite quickly I met a teacher that was into non-duality in the Buddhist group. So this is like the beginning of the 2000s. So the internet has started, but it's not like spirituality hadn't infiltrated it yet. So it was still quite hard to find talks and get resources. Like it's still like was sending off in the post the CDs and tapes and getting them from the library. So this is a guy that I met. He first of all gave me Eckhart Tolle's book, I think, and then a book by Ramesh Balsekar. And then he introduced me to Tony Parsons. Do you know Tony Parsons? And then another teacher called Nathan Gill and Gangaji. But he did it slowly. But the problem was at the time, the Buddhist group were very close to non-duality, so it caused a bit of conflict. So I think I was in the Buddhist group for like 3, 4 years. And then I had to leave. They gave me an ultimatum, like Buddhist group or non-duality. And I picked non-duality. And then I think a year after that, I went to India to see Ramesh. So after a year of leaving the Buddhist group, so I think I was 26 at the time, I went to India. Yeah.
Now, was that before or after you were sitting in a Tony Parsons audience? And
that was after.
It was after. Didn't you have an experience or even a shift, like an awakening even or something, listening to Tony Parsons? Or was that?
Yeah.
I might have misinterpreted that.
No, I must say I had loads. There was like different ones that happened. Like one time after listening to Tony Parsons, I had a car crash and then had an awakening. I got squashed by a lorry. And
tell us about that.
It was,
when you say you had an awakening, what does that mean?
Like what it meant for me was I got totally shifted out of the mind and just into a spaciousness, like a silent spaciousness, but not maybe totally, but like a lot, like the personality character died. So it was like, to me, I would call it like an expansion into a spaciousness. So it's like where my sense of being me feels quite big and spacious and empty and light. It doesn't feel like it's leases or contained to the body. And that happened like quite far away from home. So it took like 5 hours to be driven back with the car being towed back to home. And just like I couldn't stop. I mean, I'm sure I was in shock as well, but I couldn't stop laughing. Like everything was so funny. I'd just written off my dad's Mercedes.
Oh, okay. So this happened like as you crashed the car, or kind of like while?
Yeah.
Oh,
and I don't know how I managed to get out of it alive, because it wasn't actually my fault. Like, so I say I wrote off my dad's. It was actually this lorry. He just he was a Polish driver, and England drives on a different side from mainland Europe, and so they have a bad blind spot. My dad said to me afterwards, you shouldn't have ever sat next to him when you realized he was Polish. But we were like kind of in traffic. We were at like 60 miles per hour. And I was trying to get past him, and then he didn't see me, so he just came out. And I don't know how I managed to get to the other side of the road without the other cars coming into me, because there was that moment where I was like, I wasn't scared of being killed by him because he'd done my damage. My car was all damaged and squished on the passenger side. I think it was the passenger side. And I just remember being like, the car's behind, you know, like how are the cars behind going to stop when there's like this amount of traffic? Yeah. But I managed to get the car, but I just kind of blanked a bit this bit. I can't really remember. I just managed to get it to the side of the road. So it was like one of those, and just felt totally in peace. And, you know, it was just like.
When you felt that peace, or that something falling away, whatever it is, were you relating that to Buddhism, or what Buddha was talking about, or awakening, or was it just kind of like, what the heck? Oh, you were. So you were.
Yeah, but afterwards, not in the moment. Yeah. In the moment, you're just like really in it, and you're not really thinking about it. But afterwards, I did. But also more when I had a big awakening later. I looked back on these experiences and was like, there it was, like happening all the time. There was another time with Tony Parsons where this is very naughty what Lisa did. She took LSD and then went to see Tony.
Good for you. I like it.
Of course, this is completely legal in England. I've not admitted to anything.
Oh yeah, someone put on my video. I just read a comment. It's like, I watched your video over and over and over on high dose THC last night, and I started. I don't have a. They're like, I don't have any sense of space anymore. It's kind of terrifying because there's no self anywhere, and it's all one thing, and and I'm like, man, okay, well, I didn't say to do that, but can't stop you.
Yeah. I'm not recommending this to anyone.
Right.
It was very stupid. I was 25 or 26 when I did it. Especially going through London, because you do talks in London. And I sat at the back, and I was sat in front of a radiator, and there was no chairs in front of me. So it was the direct view to Tony. And what happens to me when I'm doing something like that is I lose the ability to think about the situation, and I kind of trip quite a lot. Some people, it's different. So I kept sitting there thinking I was on fire, but I didn't have the ability to think, oh, it's a radiator or I should move or anything. So I'd just be like, I'm on fire. But I wasn't scared or anything. I was just like, I am on fire. And I couldn't really think about that. And then Tony kept going to me because I was most probably like, and I was just directly in front of him. He kept being like, and so it was this goblin or fire devil. It was like, and I was just like, I'm on fire. It wasn't bad. It sounds bad. I wasn't having a bad time. I was really, I think in it, just really in the momentary perception of what was happening. But I was really too hot because the radiator was behind me.
Yeah.
So that was one, I had some amazing experiences going to see Tony. That's really a gift.
Yeah, he's a very, very direct pointer. It's nice.
Yeah.
And
I can't think of any at the moment, but I have I had memory problems before, but since this big awakening happened 10 years ago, my memory is shocking, and it just all gets further and further, and it gets confuddled and confused. I might have memory issues. We never know.
Yeah, I can relate to that. It's fascinating, especially going through medical training, because I find that I remember what I really need to remember, but I don't remember to remember. And when often what happens is someone will ask something, you remember you said this 3 days ago, and I'm literally completely blank. I have no idea. I can't even construct that reality. I'm like, okay, yeah, I probably said that, or but it doesn't mean I never remember, because sometimes a memory will come, but it's there's no one creating that memory or not creating. It's just there or it's not. It's so funny. So this definitely affects your memory, but I find people generally adjust, but sometimes you have to set timers and literally adjust in practical ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was it like to sit and listen to Ramesh? That you did that for a good amount of time, didn't you?
Yeah. It was really amazing. Really beautiful. I have really special memories about that time. It was, and not just listening to Ramesh, being in Mumbai by myself as well, because, I'm 26. It's kind of the first time that I've been away from my friends, what I know, my parents, for long periods of time. I went to university, but it's still an hour and a half or 2 hours drive from my home, from my parents' home. And I'd been on holiday, but being away for that amount of time, in such a different culture, and then listening to Ramesh's talks every day and being with the group that were going to the talks, I think it was really profound experience. And it took a while for me to soften to Ramesh. When I first went, there was a bit of resistance, and to really fall in love with him. That it wasn't at first. I remember being a little maybe nervousness. It was such a small group as well. On the first day, he was like, "Come and talk to me," and sit on the main chair, and I was like, "No."
Yeah. I think he was a student of Nisargadatta, I believe, maybe.
Yeah, he was his translator.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was his student as well.
Sure, and he spoke in that way. That was his sort of style of pointing, is very direct. And
when I went to see him, he wasn't so direct anymore. He was speaking more, he would call about happiness and the flow of life. So he would still talk about consciousness, but then he would, I kind of like it. He would then like, so if somebody came in and said, I'm consciousness, he'd be like, no, you're not, you're the ego. Like, so he was kind of trying to decipher between like this personality structure and this no-thingness, the emptiness or the spaciousness. He was speaking more about the person and happiness and the effects of the recognition in the person by the time I went to see him. I think years before that, he was more like Nisargadatta and more about consciousness and the I am.
Yeah. So at what point did you move to Australia?
So after I'd been going to Ramesh for a while, I met my next boyfriend. I was single at that time when I was there. And then I met my boyfriend, Roger. And we didn't meet at Ramesh's talks. We actually met at Osho's ashram in Pune. And then we didn't go to his talks while we were in India. And then we kind of got together and I went to Australia. And then I think like 6 months later, or 4 or 5 months later, I can't remember the timeline, we went to see Ramesh together. So we flew from Australia to India to see him. And he worked out that we were together and he knew us both separately from different times we've been there. And he was like pointing to me and he goes, if you want to wake up, you have to listen to everything that Roger says. I was just like, oh my God. Everything? Well, because of this not OCD, this obsessive, like I fixate on things. Like, so when I'm going to do something or when I like something, like the vegetarian veganism, it's like I'd follow this lady around finding out everything about veganism. I did. I listened to Roger for 3 years, like hours and hours. Like sometimes we would talk like 5 hours a day. Like I was obsessive. I did it exactly what I was told. It's just quite crazy. I mean, I had to be a little bit cuckoo to do that.
Yeah. Well, it worked out. I mean, the right place, right situation, right conditions. You know?
But I look back and I'm like, what 27-year-old young woman does that type of thing?
Yeah.
Like an Indian guy like that I barely know. I just read his talks. It's like, listen to everything your boyfriend says. Roger's just like, yes.
That's right. That's right. So he just talked non-duality to you, like basically every day.
But he wouldn't call it non-duality. He wasn't into calling it that. He would call it happiness in daily life. And he was just starting being a teacher, so I was like his first student, and it was just really me, and there was 2 other people, our neighbors. They used to come around and sometimes listen to Roger talk, but it was just kind of me. And I think sometimes that he was going through this phase where he was maybe also learning how to speak and how to articulate it and going through a process himself. So I think like I got all of that, like the 3 years as he evolved. So he evolved and changed as I was there as well.
Yeah. And so at some point, I know you don't mind I'm leading down this story path, right? Because I kind of remember some of the details. But at some point you ended up in Southeast Asia or?
Yeah, Bali, yeah.
Bali, okay. Yeah. And was it just on a holiday vacation or? What?
Well, no, I'd got dumped by Roger.
Okay.
So after 3 years of this, and so I was quite young, obviously, and I'd left my whole life in England. So I'd gone to this whole new life, and it was like being in a monastery for 3 years. So we lived in the middle of what they called the bush, or what we would call the forest. And it was like really remote. I used to see my mom and dad. They would either come over or go to the UK. And we'd see the neighbors, and we'd go to India once or twice a year. But apart from that, it was very much like, you know how the Karate Kid was like, wax on, wax off. Yeah. Wax on. I did that for 3 years, but it was raking leaves. Because we lived in the bush and all the fires, you have to like constantly be raking the leaves off the property. And it was a huge property. So I raked leaves for 3 years and listened to him and was totally into this life. We also had 2 dogs. And then he just woke up one day and was like, it's over. I think it's time for you to leave. I was like really shocked. I really didn't expect it. I was also relieved as well. Like, there was like one part of me that wanted to go, because it's like a lot that I did. And I was like really not on the internet. Like I didn't really, all the new Facebook and YouTube that had come up in those 3 years, you know, like 2007 or 8 till 2011, like life had changed a lot and I'd been really remote. And, he asked me to leave, and his version was, and I love it that he says this, his version was, it's like when the teacher says, or he says the day that he asked me to leave was he turned over his calendar and it says, when the student is ready, the teacher will ask them to leave. And then he was like, I think you need to leave. So then it was like, after 3 years, like, I couldn't go back to the UK. How could I relate to my friends or to my family anymore? Like, what was I going to do with this body? Like, I was so different to 3 years prior. Like, people can't understand what that's like, removing yourself from your whole, everything you know, your whole life. I'd given up writing. I'd given up everything, like really become like a monk or a nun. So then Bali was close by. It was like a cheap holiday destination, like Spain or something used to be when I was growing up. So I just decided it's 3 hours flight to fly over there for a month and just kind of like be with myself and work out what to do next and just feel my feelings about like leaving this life. I would lose my visa for Australia, like my partner, my home, my dogs, and my friends. I'd made 2 friends there. And I was there for like a week, I think. And then I had like a massive mind-blowing bang shift. Like,
okay, before we go into that, because this is, I really want to hear about this. I just want to point out, again, every interview I do is geared toward anyone listening to this who's like starting to turn toward that inner prompting. I just want to point out, you know, first of all, I love this. I love all the texture of the story and all the crazy twists and turns. And as you point out along the way, like some of it is like, what the fuck? Like, why would someone do that? You know, and, but what I feel through it is you, this whole time, were really committed at the heart level to call it what you want, truth, living truth, really sorting out the suffering thing, whatever it is, that's obvious to me. And, you know, this will look different for everyone. It just does. Yeah. But you might find yourself in some really crazy situations, strange situations, surprising circumstances. But man, the willingness to just turn toward that mystery at the level of heart and even mind and all of it. And it's so powerful. And that I can just feel how this all culminated in this that we're talking about here.
Yeah. And the bit that I missed out of the 3 years, like, it wasn't just intense being cut off and everything. Like, I also went through some heaven and hells in that forest. Like, you know, being that still and having everything taken away from you, you haven't got anything left to blame for your unhappiness. So you're kind of left with your unhappiness and your state of mind. And I had some real hells, like real hells, like, I mean, like madness hells. And I also had some like, heavens, like it was paradise, like more heavens than I did hells. But sometimes when the hells came, it was like really like, awful. So it was like such an intense experience, but I really got used to being okay with everything. Like after I left the forest, it was like no internal state could frighten me in a way anymore. Even if it was like intense fear, like that couldn't frighten me. It was like there was nothing left which could be worse than what I'd already experienced. Like it was like internally, like not I hadn't experienced war, but internally experienced, like there was no feeling that could have been worse than that. So I wasn't scared of my feelings anymore, and I wasn't scared of my madness or not mine as in like Lisa's more mad than everybody. I kind of think that the human race has a propensity towards madness because of thinking, but like our delusions and our ideas about the world.
Yeah, man, what an amazing set of circumstances. Life is just ingenious to put you there. Yeah, and Roger was really compassionate with it all as well. That was very helpful. Yeah. And those hells, I want to, reiterate, I talk about this a lot, like you going through this process, however it goes for you, however you need to go through it, you will encounter things that you can't really be fully prepared for. You're going to experience very intense stuff inwardly, and see things you never thought were there, actually. And the dark nights of the soul are a real thing, but they are really experiential. Ultimately, they're in the realm of experience, and they do come and go. But to try to use spirituality to avoid that, to avoid existential fear and terror, you're selling yourself a bill of goods, because you're going to have to face it. You have to face that shadow and go completely into it, right? To come out the other side, in a sense.
Yeah. And so,
anyway,
so the time I got into Bali, I wasn't scared of myself anymore. Like, I wasn't scared of my feelings. Like, I wasn't trying to run away or bypass my feelings. I was like, really.
That's important. I mean, that's thorough authenticity, thorough congruence with whatever's happening, all the emotional landscape and so forth, is, to me, that just even outside of any spiritual spectrum, that is true maturity in the emotion spectrum, in the emotion body. If any human can really live that way, however they get there, your propensity to cause violence to yourself and others is dramatically reduced. It's not impossible, but then we get into identity stuff, right? So, what happened in Bali? What was the?
Well, so it started like a few days before the big shift. Is that I kept having these experiences, a little like I was falling out of myself, and I could relate it to feeling like a little stoned or something, and I kept feeling like the world was vibrating or something, but I didn't really think much about it, because I'd had so many weird things, and Roger was a stickler for saying, it's experience. So it's just like, it's experience. So all these kind of weird things were happening. It was building, but I didn't really know it. And then Roger was very much like, in every given moment, do exactly what you feel like doing, which is a dangerous statement if it's not fully understood. And so I walked past this angel healer, and I don't think at that point I'd ever been to an angel healer. I don't even know what that was. And it was like really spiritual and white and all these things going on. And I just found myself going into the angel healer. And like, he did a reading, and he was like, you're going to be a messenger of God. And I was like, well, I really don't see that happening. Like, Roger had always said, I will never teach non-duality. And I was like, and I still suffer. And I was like, that's not going to happen. And he says, you'll teach it by kissing people on the forehead. And I was like, oh, okay. But I thought it was kind of sweet. And I went away feeling like really like, oh, that's really nice to say that. And I was like really like touched by it. And yeah, I just had a really nice feeling. And then I think it was the next day or a day or two after that, I went out for breakfast and was in a fuck it mood, and decided to have like banana fritters and ice cream for breakfast.
Sounds good to me.
And I was still sitting there like filling the cake hole. And then I started thinking, wow, I don't remember if it was the waitress now or the room, but started thinking like, God, the waitress is so beautiful, or the room is so beautiful. It was like an outside area. I mean, Bali is amazing. I was like, wow, I didn't notice how beautiful that waitress was. And then I would be like, wow, I didn't realize how beautiful the wall was. Wow, the floor, the table. And I didn't have any cognitive realization that I was having an experience. I really thought that everything was insanely beautiful, and I just hadn't noticed, because I was like, wow. Like, and everything just was becoming more and more beautiful. It was like sparkling at the seams. And then it felt like my consciousness, so not Lisa's consciousness, but this like empty looking, which had been recognized many times before. And I'd recognized it and had experiences, but it felt like this consciousness that's totally impersonal, and this sense of I am, which is really impersonal, kind of like began to go forward, like in slow motion, like, and then they just sort of went forward and forward and forward. So it felt like I was getting like really big, like my sense of being me, my essence, not Lisa the character, my essence was getting like really big, and I still had no sense I was having experience. I couldn't think something's happening. I was just like, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger until it disappeared into everything. And then I walked around really like I was like tripping for a while. Like I couldn't perceive me at all or other. So I don't know if thinking had stopped. I don't think so. Maybe I couldn't think to think. Has thinking stopped? But I just was like, I had no sense of me or the other person at all, like nothing. So I had no sense of what was going on. So I was kind of like really, it's a non-functional state really, and it could be quite dangerous, but luckily it wasn't. Like, cause I started walking around, like I left the restaurant, I managed to pay, I think, or I walked out without paying, I don't know. And I remember like this person started laughing, and I was like, yeah, it's really funny. Like I felt so much love and bliss, and I was like, And then at some point I realized that he wasn't well. Like he was like, there was something not right with him, and that but I didn't really realize it. But I just realized, oh, okay, I have to stop doing this now, and sort of moved away. And then I couldn't cross the road. I couldn't work out where I was in comparison to these moving cars. Like it was really an intense experience. I managed to get back home. I don't know what I did actually, but at some point, I came across a dying dog and was just like, this is the most beautiful thing there is. Like it was, I'd never seen death in this way. It was just so beautiful. It was such a strong experience. And then I managed to get home, and, you know, like over the next months in Bali, it was kind of like some form of processing it, but also slipping back into this like really extreme state. You can't live from that state I was in. That you'd need a caretaker. Like I was really not functional. It's amazing that I managed to. I was by myself in Bali, survive, and there was like the mind coming, trying to understand what happened. Like this is not what people talk about. Like I didn't expect this. Like it was like, how does this fit in? Like this is unexpected. And then like just ecstasy, just like so much love and ecstasy, and the world would shake. It felt like the world was quivering, and just like really had these like extreme spiritual experiences, but they were experiences. It's not like the final place, but it kind of blasted a hole in this. And since then, like the experience has been profoundly different. It was like, I feel if that hadn't happened to me, I would have had most probably a hard life. Like that completely changed my, this.
Yeah. With that, was there a sort of very fundamental existential, not necessarily fear, but like a sort of disappointment that that everything you thought was anything is just completely not even there, or not true, not I
don't think there was disappointment. There was like odd feelings, like I don't feel grateful. Like that sounds like odd, but there was like odd feelings, like no gratitude. There was actually sometimes intense fear. But I think my thinking was really reduced, so I can't really remember it, because we need thoughts to help us remember things. So there was like all types of experience, but it really was the disappointment.
Yeah, I hear this sometimes from people who move through this specific perceptual filter where there's literally essentially when there's no subject or object anymore at all, and the environment is just the environment, and there's no one in it, and there's no one outside of it either. It's just that kind of thing. And it sometimes what I see sometimes is people will touch into it, and then somehow they don't actually back out of it, but it's just not stable. And what their mind or their ego says is, holy shit, like if I go there, I'm gone. Like there's no me left, that kind of thing. Yeah,
no, I think I was, because I'd just been through so much in the Forest of Roger, like I think I was kind of okay with that. Yeah. And I mean, there were like cognitive functioning issues that I found came with it. Like I remember trying to say to a few people, you know, you might have to look after my body at some point, but I don't think I was really scared about that. Like, I think I would think I might stop being able to function completely, but I seemed to manage to go through it and carry on functioning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't too much. There was some fear, but it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't too much.
And it sounds a bit like maybe or maybe not some like Kundalini energetic experiences with it, the shaking.
Probably,
and
yeah.
Did you have like involuntary body movements or any of that crazy stuff?
I did when I was in the forest with Roger. Yeah, most probably I did have. Yeah, it was most probably massive Kundalini stuff happening as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you left Bali, was that where you met Khaleesi, by the way?
No, that was a year later in Thailand. I met her.
Oh, okay. All right. So what did you do when you left? When you left Bali in this non-state? And this isn't reversible. I assume this never went away. It didn't
go away, but what happened was I integrated it more into the character. So like the character, and there was still more trauma and stuff in the body. It wasn't like Lisa was totally fixed or stuff like that, but it was like a integration. Like, how do you live this? So I went back to Australia after that because Roger was then going away, and so I was then going to go back and look after the dogs, and then kind of like work out all my visas and everything, and yeah, that was my next thing. And I tried to tell Roger about it, but he was totally not interested. I hadn't told anyone. I was just like, well, I'll just tell Roger because I can't tell my friends. I can't tell my mom. I can't tell anyone. So I tried to tell Roger, and he was just like, cut me off before I even managed to get out. I was like, this is really, and so that didn't go very far. So it just like really went through all this like really intense stuff with really no one to speak about it with. And it was kind of just, it was 2011. So it was just kind of prior to this all taking off on YouTube, or if it was on YouTube, I wasn't aware of it, you know, like finding Kundalini teachers or anything like that.
So there are a handful of your very early videos that I know at least one of them you're in Australia. Yeah. I think a handful of them. They're really good, and I pass them around sometimes, or I send them to people. The one about death is very, very good, and the transmission. I mean, you transmit all the time. Like I can't even explain it, but those videos are really powerful. And part of it maybe is because of the freshness of that.
Yeah, totally.
And the absolute wonder that you're in. You know, so anyway, anyone watching this, check those out. You can look at they're on your YouTube channel, and they're like the oldest videos, but they're quite powerful. And so what did you have any thought of, like, what next? How did you start talking about it? Well,
then, so life is just so interesting at different plays. So our friend, you know, I said there were two other students, our next door neighbor, like one of them had a brain tumor for 9 years and then it got activated again. So he went into dying, and I was working, but because I was only working part-time, I ended up being his driver because he still had a business and was working, even though his body and brain, like his body was beginning to not function. He couldn't drive and he was losing senses, and he sort of died over 6 months period. So then I couldn't really leave Australia or make any plans because I was kind of involved very much with that process. And that's how I began talking. So I began talking to him. So we would have these mad journeys because he was like having his brain tumor, which was like growing into his brain. And so his functioning was stopping. And then I was off my head. Like this first period, I was like off my head. It felt like I was permanently stoned. So you had like off their head, driving around Australia in he had like a big, massive truck. I'm driving. Going to all his building sites. He was a builder and helping and doing different errands for them. And so when we were in the truck, we began to talk. And I began to tell him about what had happened. So he was the first person I told. And he'd sort of known me over the years, you know, with Roger, quite a close bond through the four of us.
Yeah.
So that's how I began talking.
You were a bit of a hospice person there, it sounds like, with him,
Yeah.
What an amazing person to be around when you're dying, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't think of it from that perspective, from my perspective, because I was watching him.
Sure.
It's like, it felt like a real blessing here because it was like a brain tumor. Have you ever seen someone pass with a brain tumor? I'm sure so it just slowly takes away your functioning. So it's like, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. Like, so he, it's really like a gradual thing. Like you lose the movement of the arm or the sensations in your finger. And it's like such a surrender process that he has to go through. And it was like really beautiful. It was really painful sometimes and really beautiful on other times. Like, that experience with him.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So
he encouraged me to record the talks and then put them on YouTube.
Yeah.
So, or Facebook it was, I can't remember. And then I just put up one video and then it just got sent round. It did the rounds, it got like loads and loads of shares.
Yeah.
And that's how that started. It was a little bit surprising for all of us.
Right.
Including Roger. He only had 4 students, and then suddenly I had like 2,000.
It's amazing how it happens, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love it. To use a Buddhist term, like the Dharma wheel turning does whatever it wants, it's amazing. It's amazing. When you started working more directly with people with this, or whatever you're talking about when you talk to people, I guess I'm curious about a few things. One is, how did you approach that? Did you have any method whatsoever, or was it just completely organic as far as working one-on-one with somebody, answering questions about non-duality or their experience or emotion, etc.?
So in my first years of speaking, it was just really about like just sitting there and speaking from that empty space. And I think that's maybe why the beginning talks, like they feel like they have so much transmission. So I wasn't going off of that. And it just wanted to express like extreme non-duality. And it was like really joyful, and it was just very simple, I think, in a way, but complex also for people that didn't know the subject. And then as I worked more, I began to realize that that really failed some people. Like I'll be honest, like I came across suicides, not that went to my talks necessarily, but like they'd come to my talks online, and I knew, particularly in young men, like that had killed themselves. And I began to see lots of problems with speaking about it really directly, in the sense that if it's misunderstood, it's a disaster.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it's taken as a meditation, so that's what I was doing. It's like I was trying to give that experience of the meditation, like transmission, or I was just like going very directly into it. But if that's not heard, and it's heard from a mind perspective, and you use it to improve your life, it's an absolute disaster. And I found that people would come using it as or looking for an excuse to kill themselves, or looking for an excuse to escape. And this was, so to me, if I were to say everything's meaningless, like my heart radiates. Like I was saying this to my partner yesterday. I can't remember what we were talking about, but I was like, it just doesn't matter. It's all meaningless. Like, like imagine if you were going to die and you knew you were going to die in a year's time. Like, who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
I just love that, like saying those types of things. But as I got into teaching more and more, I realized that this was problematic. Yeah. That was heartbreaking. Like that.
Yeah.
That was, like watching that and watching people take it the wrong way. That really hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. There's such a beauty in coming from that emptiness, and then finding that emptiness in every form there is, including the form called delusion, the form called I'm a human being suffering, and being able to be completely mind-identified suffering with that human being without having to be anything in the absolute. That kind of flexibility, it's a different level of transmission, in my opinion. And meeting somebody 100% wherever they are with absolute vulnerability in the human spectrum and not compromising the absolute truth either, because they're not too, that's where the rubber really meets the road. And I've noticed you evolve over the years with that. Very, very beautiful, very beautifully. The absolute transmission comes through. It doesn't matter. You don't have to even talk about it directly when you live it. The relative is the absolute, and it comes through in the relative too. And it's so beautiful. But
in that, I had to learn, this body had to learn more about psychology. So I had to, at that point, I had to begin to understand why people were coming to these talks and doing that. So then in about 2016, after quite a few stabs from this, what I just experienced, just really being confronted where it was just not working for certain people. I really got on my Lisa obsessiveness and got obsessed with psychology and really studied psychology, went into it and understood Western psychology and personality disorders and mental illnesses. I had some knowledge of it before, but really went into all different therapies and trauma work. I'm not an expert in it. I'm not saying that I teach that, but just so I could understand what Western perspective was on the personality structure in order for me to be able to speak to people better and understand why people were presenting certain behaviors and dynamics. But I got obsessed, and I still do it. I'm still obsessed a bit with psychology. I haven't quite finished my doctor's degree in psychology, my homemade doctor's degree.
There's really good information accessible on the internet. There's videos by people who are absolute experts in personality disorders that teach other therapists about personality disorders. You can learn a lot if you really want to. And I just want to tell you, when I look at people who teach this, transmit, work with people, waking up, however you want to say that, the ones that have taken up that investigation, however they have in psychology, and they have to do it themselves too. You have to see your own psychology. You have to go through your own emotion stuff. You have to know it. And you have to know it. To know the various patterns that mind identification functions out of and so forth. That is really, really critical in the teachers I see that I consider really, 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 really good. I'll give you an example, Adyashanti. I've met him, I've been to his retreats. The way he teaches, the way he points, wherever someone is, as soon as they open their mouth, he's right there with them. He doesn't take it to the absolute every time if that's not, and he intuitively knows it. But it's interesting because he said before his huge shift, while he was in this process, he said he read 200 books on psychology. He's I didn't even know I was reading them, but I was reading them. And I feel the same way. I'm fascinated with the problem, the world of mind identification, the problem of being human, the life of quiet desperation. This is what we see around us all the time. If we actually look and open our hearts to people, that there's a lot of suffering, heavy duty suffering, and knowing the mechanism of it, how it works, and being willing to just meet someone where they are and not forcing them into an absolute experience or pushing them to wake up because I'm uncomfortable, because I can't not feel what you feel, that kind of work to me is so, so important. And to be able to just serve whomever that's right there in front of me by being exactly who and what they are right now and not needing to change it at all. And then it finds its way. It finds its way to truth somehow. I don't know how. But yeah, some people, they just need support too, emotional support, and they need to feel okay. They need validation. Osho even said, if you want to eliminate your ego, you got to have a strong ego first. So some people don't even have that. They have such a disrupted sense of self, personhood from bad upbringing and all that. That's not the kind of person you want to shoot into the absolute or talk about no self constantly. It's just too disruptive for them. anyway,
no,
just wanted to
totally.
reflect on that because that's an area I feel strongly about.
Yeah, totally.
And there are
I do
more and
as
more
well.
and more people who come on YouTube now speaking with that exact language. There's no self, there's no one to do anything. The characters, all of it. So anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, I really love it, but I also can see just so much dysfunction as well, like in that world. I mean, I received the most abuse online when I was speaking more absolutely. Like, I mean, the community is like got a lot of unconscious stuff happening in it.
It does, but you know what's so beautiful about that is even though it's it's coming from unconsciousness, and that rage that's coming towards you is from unconsciousness. It's also the absolute. It's also Buddha nature, just going, you need to keep tuning in yourself. There's still, even though there's no person you can reflect back to anymore, and there isn't, there's still something in the relative that can learn from this, that can evolve, that can essentially love more. And loving more means loving someone exactly where they are and exactly who they are, not needing to wake them up or change them. And then the awakening it happens naturally, as night follows day. It's a natural cycle, and it happens in a way that they can integrate. It's just so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
And I'm with you. I love that. I love that transmission as well. And sometimes I say it's not wrong. It's not wrong. It's just not always 100% right, depending on the person listening to it.
Yeah.
It's being able to calibrate that is important. Yeah.
Disaster for certain people. Like for me, it wasn't. I mean, I'm sure it was a disaster. Well, not a disaster, but I'm sure it did create dysfunction in my personality. But somehow, with the Buddhist stuff, and I also went to therapy as well when I was in my teens and in my 20s. I didn't talk about that. And Roger taught somatic therapy. Like he didn't teach it; he wasn't skilled in it, but he taught a somatic therapy that I did. And so there was some part of me that didn't have that, but I've seen some terrible effects on people from using non-duality, like extreme non-duality, to try to heal their person. And they already, like you say, they already have a very weak sense of self. So when they hear there is no self, that kind of resonates, but it's resonating in a darkness, or it's resonating in a cage. Yeah.
And I think one of the personality traits that this becomes problematic for are people who are really avoidant, and dissociate. People who dissociate. They need to do integration work first. Actually, they need to do emotion work and all that to start to feel. They need validation, as a human being, that you're okay and your emotions actually matter. And then once you have that more solid sense of self as a physiologic and being. Then you can really start to dig into identity structures and all that, I think. But, yeah. Do you have, this is kind of abrupt to bring it up now, but I was actually curious because someone just emailed me looking for a teacher. Do you still do one-on-one, or you have availability for that?
Just fully booked. Like
you're booked, okay. Yeah.
I don't do so many, like I don't, because I do writing most of the time, so it's, I only do a few a week, but just fully booked with waiting lists. But they can join like a small group that I do, so I do these Zoom groups every so often, where it's just like 10 or 20 people, and then it's more intimate, and it's not shared, it's not recorded, so I can be more vulnerable.
Very cool. And also, you still do you do lives where people can either message a question in, or even get on Skype, right, on occasion, and ask questions.
Yeah, I do that most Sundays. On YouTube.
You've been doing that for years.
Yeah, but now I don't do it as such a fixed timetable. So you have to subscribe to the website, to the YouTube channel to know when I go live. It's not so fixed, the times. It used to be Sunday at 4:00 or Sunday at 6:00. And now I kind of do it most Sundays, but I've kind of sometimes do it Saturdays. I change the time a bit. Yeah.
So now, one last question I have for you.
Yes.
Do you have any advice, or what would you say to somebody listening to this that says, as crazy as that thing that happened to Lisa sounds, that's where I'm going. I know many people who are like, that's what I'm interested in. I'm really interested in taking this to the depths or taking it as far as it goes. What would you tell somebody like that, or that's hooked up that way?
There's so many different ways that you could see it. Like, if that's the way it's going to go, that's the way it's going to go. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what's going to appear. But then cautionary advice would be to do what you say, in the sense of making sure that you've got like a stable ego first, because otherwise you're going to implode, you're going to get attracted to destructive situations. So make sure the ego is stable. Mm-hmm. And then it's it's really Ramesh used to say, you're in the tiger's mouth. It's like, once you start in this subject, like, can you really stop? Like, so somebody said to me the other day, like, they were finding it harder to relate to people in society. And they were like, what if I keep going down this path? Will I be able to still relate? I mean, like with everyday people, like, mm-hmm. like relate and be able to speak to them. And they were implying that, it's a bad thing. And I kind of shrugged, and I was like, but can you ever go back, erasing the information that you've got out of your mind now? Like, can you stop this? Like, it's like, once you get into this, it's like, mm-hmm. it's gonna, even if you think, okay, I'm going to stop this for the next year, the thoughts are still going to nag at you. Like, who am I? Why am I alive? I am going to die. Yeah. Hang on, I'm going to die. This is problematic. We need to think about something here.
Adyashanti has a beautiful thing he said about this, that he says, it's like you find a celestial body in the universe, like this beautiful, massive celestial body, and you're so like, wow, I want to get closer to that, and you start getting closer and closer, and then you cross the event horizon where you can't turn around anymore, and you feel the insanely massive gravitational pull of this thing that's sucking you fucking molecule from molecule and identity structure from identity structure, and there's no way out. That's when existential terror.
Yeah.
But it's okay.
Yeah.
It turns out okay.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it saved my life. I feel like because of the trauma that I had in my teens, I don't think I think my life would have been very difficult if that energetical shift hadn't happened, because I think it helped, even though I'd worked through a lot of stuff and became at peace with things, it sort of like helped shallow it out, or like make it less intense, and just made everything easier. Okay.
Yeah. And those tragedies, traumas and so forth, is, you would never wish them on anyone, but everybody has some version of a trauma or tragedy in their life, a loss of a loved one, loss of a parent, child, spouse, sibling, major health challenges where it's going to shorten your life, and I always kind of say to people, these are these eventualities, when they come, like they are opportunities too, to open to something that's beyond suffering, and again, you don't seek them out, but if you are that person that's had a trauma, that's had a challenging thing, like, don't convince yourself that that's actually stopping you from realizing your true nature or waking up, or it may actually be, one of the impeti, I don't know, to actually help the process get going and stuff. Yeah. So, yeah. So, well, thank you. So I want to say one other thing to anyone listening, and I don't know why I'm inclined to say it, but I just feel like I'm going to say it, so I'm going to say it. The interesting thing about you that I noticed is when I first saw you on the internet, and I saw your videos, and I think I interacted with you on a live one time or something, and I was like, I got to meet this person, and I'm the kind of person who will do that. I went out and met Adyashanti and Gangaji and different people, but the fascinating thing about you, just from my own experience, is your ability to transmit and point, and now even more your ability with like really knowing people and knowing the psychological structures and so forth, is really potent. It's obvious to me. It's obvious online, but there's a totally different thing when I was like physically around you. Like, it was completely different. It was energetic, and I don't even know what it was. It's the way you move. It's just something so simple, but is literally energetic. So to be around somebody who has found themselves as the entire environment suddenly, and the sense of self is just nowhere to be found because there's only the environment functioning and self-responding and all that. You don't just feel it in that person, you feel it in the environment.
Yeah.
The signature of truth is powerful, and transmission is powerful, and so I just think it is helpful to go out, to do retreats, to make some effort in your life if you're interested in this and you're working on it, to find a teacher, get in contact with somebody that you resonate with and trust, not a weirdo, but someone like that, because that direct interaction is really actually quite powerful.
Yeah.
It's one thing to listen to someone online, but when they're in your energetic space, they're affecting you whether they like it or not, or know it or not, and whether you like it or not. And, like you said with Roger, a lot of that was probably going on there too.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just want to say, in person, it was a totally different experience of meeting you. First of all, you were really quiet. And I thought that was so cool because I don't know why I wouldn't have thought you were quiet, because you talk online, of course, but you were generally pretty quiet and stuff. But just energetically, it was completely obvious to me. The whole room was completely empty, literally, in a good way. It just felt that way. And so anyway, I don't know why I felt like saying that, but anyone listening might be interested in. So
yeah, nice.
And also, I want to say, I think I told you this when I met you, is when you said that Lisa tried to save the world but couldn't do it, and ultimately Lisa, in one sense, went away. That's really the ultimate sacrifice, and that sacrifice is a sacrifice of compassion. There's no one there that can take credit for it. I already know that. It's just how it is. But it's true. It's a truth, and I want to just acknowledge that what you're doing for the world, what you're doing for people who come in contact with you, is, in my opinion, and it's not just an opinion, it's an energetic knowing, is the highest thing I see a human can do. It's amazing to me, and I'm just glad you're there, and the people have that access to you.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Thanks for saying that. Yeah.
You're welcome.
I kind of forget about all these types of things. It's, what it's like. It's like you're so into what's happening, you kind of forget the way it affects or how it's being perceived.
I totally get that. It's funny, with writing the book, I would write a chapter, and I had a friend that just a friend from years ago, and I would send him a chapter, and then I would forget to write it for 3 months. I wouldn't even cross my mind. I'd just be doing whatever I'm doing, in my yard, raking leaves, doing all the things I like to do. And he'd be like, dude, I needed the next chapter. Oh, thank you for reminding me to write the next chapter. He's like, yeah, it was so powerful. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that's right. It's I forget that this stuff even can have effects on people, because it, in one sense, is totally mundane. It's just what's happening. It's just simplicity, innocence. It's the rock is as much teacher as I am. The sky, my teachers are everything, everywhere, all the time. And it's so beautiful. It's so simple, but yeah, it's so weird, because it's self-reflection doesn't really function like that. So anyway, yeah, cool.
Nice.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure our viewers are going to get a lot out of this, and
thank you. It was really a nice experience speaking with you. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's been really nice. Thanks for going back through all that. I know it's hard to pull up those memories sometimes. All right. Well, you take care.